Martha Simons sometimes felt invisible. At 74, she was the type of elderly woman people never looked at twice. Gray-haired, slightly hunched, and always carrying the same worn blue bag over her shoulder. That's why, when she saw something that shouldn't have been there, nobody noticed her. On that rainy Tuesday, Martha stood by the window of Exotic Haven Pet Shop, the newest establishment in their sleepy town of Redwood Glen, watching a man in an expensive suit hand over a small metal box to the store owner through the back door. Something about the hastiness of the exchange, the way both men nervously glanced around, made her freeze in place. When the store owner's eyes met hers, a flash of alarm crossed his face. 3 days later, a street cat appeared on her porch. Not one of the usual strays Martha had been feeding for years, but an elegant creature with smoke marble-colored fur and unusual blue-gold eyes. He didn't beg for food like the others. Instead, he sat upright, as if attending a royal reception, and looked at her as though she was the one who needed help. Most peculiar was the medallion on his neck, a thin metal plate with an engraved symbol, a stylized eye surrounded by wavy lines. "Who put this on you, handsome?" Martha asked, reaching for the medallion. The cat stepped back but didn't run away, just watched her with curiosity. When Martha took another careful step, the cat turned and gracefully jumped off the porch, stopping a few meters away, as if inviting her to follow. Martha had always loved mysteries. Having worked as a librarian all her life, she'd read enough detective novels to know when a cat with a mysterious medallion invites you for a walk, it's not a coincidence. She closed the door of her small house and followed him, keeping her old flip phone, which she rarely used, in her pocket. The cat led her through streets she had walked all her life, until they reached the back of Exotic Haven. There, in the alley, the cat slipped through a narrow gap in the metal delivery doors. Martha froze. The shop was closed, dark inside. She moved closer and pressed her ear against the door. At first, nothing, then a faint sound that resembled squeaking? No, it was meowing. Not just one. Many voices, muffled but unmistakably filled with suffering. Martha looked around, checking if anyone was watching. Her heart pounded as she pulled out her phone to light up the screen for illumination and leaned down to peek through the gap. In the dim light, she saw rows of cages, many more than were displayed in the front of the store, and in them, eyes glittering in the darkness. Dozens of pairs of eyes that didn't belong to ordinary pets. A sudden thud behind her made her straighten up abruptly. A tall man in a familiar, expensive suit stood just a few meters away, partially covering his face with a phone but looking directly at her. "Can I help you, ma'am?" His voice was calm, but his eyes were cold as ice. "Oh, I was just looking for my cat," Martha replied, trying to sound like a confused old woman. "Saw him run in here. Gray one, with a medallion." Something changed in the man's eyes. "Medallion?" he repeated, taking a step forward. "What kind of medallion?" At that moment, the smoky cat appeared on the roof of the shop, silent and graceful, as a ghost, looking down at both of them with that same unwavering attention. The medallion gleamed on his neck. "There he is," Martha exclaimed, desperately pointing upward, hoping to divert the man's attention. When the man looked up, the cat did something incredible. He jumped, not toward them, but straight onto the metal awning of the adjacent building, creating a loud clatter that echoed throughout the alley. At that same moment, something small fell from the roof right at Martha's feet. The noise attracted the attention of passers-by on the main street, and the man hesitated before casting a final glance at Martha. "I wouldn't be too curious about that cat if I were you," he said, slowly backing away. "Some animals are dangerous." When the man finally disappeared around the corner, Martha bent down to pick up the object that had fallen. It was a tiny USB drive, wrapped in a piece of paper with a handwritten note. Open. They're inside. Help. Martha looked up, but the cat had already vanished. Her hands trembled as she carefully hid the drive in her pocket. In her lifetime, she had seen enough to know what she had just discovered was much bigger and more dangerous than it initially seemed. Martha's ancient desktop computer whirred to life, the fan spinning noisily as if protesting being awakened from its slumber. Her fingers trembled slightly as she inserted the USB drive. She glanced nervously at her windows, double-checking that. The curtains were drawn tight. The smoky cat sat on her worn floral armchair, watching her with those unnerving dual-colored eyes, his tail curled perfectly around his paws. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was evaluating her every move. "I'm not sure what I'm getting myself into," she murmured to the cat, who blinked slowly in response. But those sounds, those animals needed help. When the drive's contents appeared on screen, Martha gasped. Dozens of folders appeared, each labeled with strange codes. SNL 0472, RST 0913, TGR 0026. With shaking hands, she clicked on the first folder. Images filled her screen, photographs of exotic animals in horrifying conditions. Small monkeys crammed into cages meant for birds. Rainbow-colored snakes stacked in plastic containers with barely enough air holes. Rare turtles piled on top of each other like discarded toys. "Dear God," she whispered, covering her mouth. The next folder contained spreadsheets with dates, locations, and prices that made her eyes widen. The amounts were staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Changing hands for these creatures. Then she found a document with names and contact information. Her eyes froze on one particular name. Marcus Reynolds, Redwood Glen City Council. The cat meowed softly, jumping onto the desk and stepping delicately across the keyboard. Martha was about to shoo him away when she noticed he had inadvertently opened a video file. The footage showed the back room of Exotic Haven, the same cages she'd glimpsed through the door. A man's voice spoke off camera. "Latest shipment from Indonesia. The yellow-crested cockatoos will fetch at least 15 grand each. The clouded leopard cubs need to be moved tomorrow. Reynolds has a buyer in Sacramento who doesn't mind the import restrictions." The cat's paw pressed another key, pausing the video on a frame that showed the man in the expensive suit, his face fully visible now, handling a small cage containing what looked like a tiny leopard cub. Next to him stood the shop owner, counting cash. "You knew exactly what you were doing, didn't you?" Martha asked the cat, who stared back with an almost human intelligence. Martha leaned back in her chair, mind racing. The local newspaper had recently run a glowing profile on Councilman Reynolds and his charitable contributions to wildlife conservation. She remembered how the article mentioned his frequent trips to Southeast Asia for conservation work. The hypocrisy made her stomach turn, at a sudden knock at her door made Martha jump. The cat's ears flattened against his head as he slipped silently under the bed. Martha quickly ejected the USB drive and tucked it into her bra, the one place she figured no one would search an elderly woman. "Coming," she called, purposely slowing her pace as she shuffled to the door. Through the peephole, she saw the friendly face of Officer Dave Parker, the young police officer who occasionally checked on the elderly residents of Redwood Glen. "Miss Simons," he smiled when she opened the door. "Just doing my rounds. Everything okay with you today?" "Oh, fine as can be expected at my age," she replied with practiced fragility. "Good to hear. Say, I was wondering if you've seen any unusual activity around the new pet shop in town? We've had some reports of noise complaints at odd hours." Martha's heartbeat quickened, but decades of running a school library had taught her to maintain a calm exterior. Can't say that I have. I don't get out much these days, you know. Officer Parker nodded, but something in his expression made Martha uneasy. Well, if you notice anything, give me a call. We're keeping an eye on that place. After he left, Martha leaned against the door, breathing heavily. The cat emerged from under the bed, meowing insistently and pawing at the door. You want me to follow him? Martha whispered incredulously. The cat meowed again, more urgently this time. Martha peered through her front window and watched his officer. Parker walked not toward his patrol car, but directly across the street to a black sedan where a man in a suit waited. The same man from the alley. They spoke briefly before Parker got into the passenger seat and the car pulled away. The police are involved, Martha whispered, her blood running cold. Who can I possibly trust now? The cat jumped onto the windowsill and pawed at the glass, eyes fixed on a house across the street. Martha squinted, recognizing the home of Dr. Eliza Chun, the retired veterinarian who had moved to Redwood Glen last year. Dr. Chun, you think she can help us? As if in confirmation, the cat headbutted Martha's hand and purred. Martha grabbed her blue shoulder bag, slipping the USB drive inside along with her phone and a small can of pepper spray her granddaughter had insisted she carry. If the police were compromised, she needed allies, and someone who cared about animals seemed like the logical choice. I hope you know what you're doing, she told the cat as she locked her front door. Because at my age, I'm not exactly cut out for taking down criminal enterprises. The cat blinked at her once more, then leapt gracefully from the porch, leading the way across the street. As Martha followed, she couldn't help but feel that this mysterious feline was more than just a stray with a strange medallion. There was something in those mismatched eyes that spoke of purpose, and perhaps a very human desire for justice. Dr. Eliza Chin's living room was nothing like Martha had expected. Instead of the tidy, minimal space one might associate with a scientist, it was a riot of color and texture. Walls covered with masks from various cultures, shelves overflowing with books, and plants thriving in every corner. The retired veterinarian herself was equally striking. A woman in her 60s with a shock of white hair cut in a stylish bob, piercing dark eyes, and hands that moved with precision as she examined the USB drive Martha had brought. I've suspected something was wrong at that shop since it opened, Dr. Chin said, plugging the drive into her laptop. The owner, Vincent Harmon, has no background in animal care. When I offered my services as a consultant, he practically pushed me out the door. The smoky cat had made himself at home on Dr. Chin's couch, curled up like he belonged there. Strangely, Dr. Chin's own tabby cat seemed to defer to him, watching from a distance with cautious respect. Your cat, Dr. Chun said suddenly, looking up from the screen, her face pale with shock from the images she'd been viewing. He's not an ordinary stray, is he? Martha hesitated. I'm not sure what he is. He showed up 3 days ago, led me to the shop, helped me get that drive. It's almost like he knows exactly what's happening. Dr. Chin approached the smoky cat, who allowed her to examine his medallion. Her fingers traced the symbol with surprising familiarity. This is the Eye of Mao, she said quietly, an ancient Egyptian symbol associated with guardians and protectors. She looked at Martha, her expression grave. There's a legend among wildlife conservationists about a network of people who work outside the system to protect endangered species. They're called the Watchers. Most consider them a myth, but I've heard stories. You think this cat is connected to them? Martha asked, raising an eyebrow. I think, Dr. Chin said carefully, that sometimes help comes in unexpected forms. And right now, we need all the help we can get. She turned her laptop to show Martha what she'd found. These aren't just random exotic pets. This is organized trafficking of critically endangered species. That clouded leopard cub? There might be fewer than 2,000 left in the wild. These yellow-crested cockatoos? Critically endangered. Martha felt her outrage building. And Councilman Reynolds is involved. Not just involved, Dr. Chun said grimly, pointing to a document. According to this, he's one of the primary buyers and distributors. He uses his conservation charity as a front. A sudden scratch at the back door made them both jump. The smoky cat leapt from the couch and darted to the kitchen. Dr. Chin followed, cautiously, Martha behind her. When they opened the door, they found a second cat, this one thin and ragged with patches of missing fur, but wearing a similar medallion. Another one, Martha whispered. The newcomer dropped something from its mouth, a crumpled piece of paper. Dr. Chin carefully unfolded it, revealing a handwritten note. They know. Move tonight. 11 p.m. Loading dock. The two cats touched noses, communicating in some silent language of their own. Then the ragged cat disappeared into the night. I think we've just received our marching orders, Dr. Chin said with a humorless smile. She walked to a cabinet and pulled out what looked like medical bags. I've kept my emergency vet supplies ready, just in case. If those animals are being moved tonight, many of them will need immediate care. Wait, Martha said, suddenly feeling her age. We can't just rush in there. These people are dangerous. They have the police in their pocket. Not all the police. Came a voice from the doorway. Martha whirled around to see Officer Parker standing at the entrance to the kitchen, hand on his holster. Her heart nearly stopped. How did you get in here? Dr. Chin demanded. Your front door was ajar, he said calmly. I saw Ms. Simons enter earlier and wanted to continue our conversation. His eyes fell on the laptop screen still displaying images of the caged animals. I see you found the evidence. Martha stepped protectively in front of Dr. Chun. We know you're working with them. I saw you get into that man's car. To her surprise, Parker smiled sadly. Detective Carlos Mendez, Portland Wildlife Trafficking Task Force. I've been undercover in Redwood Glen for 8 months tracking this operation. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a badge different from his local police ID. That man you saw me with? I've been feeding him false information, trying to work my way higher in their organization. The smoky cat approached Officer Parker. No, Detective Mendez, and sniffed his hand cautiously before rubbing against his leg in apparent approval. Well, that's an endorsement I wasn't expecting, Mendez said, looking down at the cat with bewilderment. Can you prove you're who you say you are? Dr. Chin asked, still suspicious. Mendez pulled out his phone and made a call. It's me. I need confirmation for 2 civilians. He handed the phone to Dr. Chun. After a brief conversation, her posture relaxed slightly. It seems he's legitimate, she told Martha. They're moving the animals tonight, Mendez said urgently. But I don't have enough evidence yet to bring in my team. I need to catch Reynolds and Harmon in the act with the animals. We have the USB drive, Martha offered. Helpful, but not enough. We need eyewitnesses, photos of them with the animals, proof of the actual transport. He looked between the 2 women. I can't ask civilians to get involved, but we're already involved, Martha interrupted, surprising herself with her firmness. The cat jumped onto the counter beside her, as if backing her up. Doctor Chin nodded in agreement. Those animals need help. I have the medical knowledge, Martha has the evidence, and you have the badge. Plus, she added, gesturing to the smoky cat, we have whatever this mysterious feline brings to the table. As if responding to his cue, the cat leapt down and headed toward the front door, looking back expectantly. I think he wants us to follow him, Martha said. Again, Detective Mendez checked his watch. It's 9:45. Whatever we're going to do, Need to move fast. The cat meowed impatiently, pawing at the door. Well, Martha said, feeling a surge of adrenaline that made her feel decades younger. As my late husband used to say, age before beauty. She grabbed her blue bag and headed for the door, the others following close behind. None of them noticed the black sedan slowly cruising past the house, or the man in the expensive suit watching them through tinted windows, a phone pressed to his ear. The loading dock behind Exotic Haven was illuminated by a single flickering light, casting long shadows across the cracked concrete. Martha, Dr. Chun, and Detective Mendez crouched behind a dumpster across the alley, watching as two men loaded crates into a nondescript white van. The smoky cat sat perfectly still beside them, his unusual eyes reflecting the dim light. "That's Vincent Harmon, the shop owner," Mendez whispered, pointing to the shorter man. "And the driver is Jack Feller, Reynolds' personal assistant." "Where's Reynolds?" Martha asked, her breath forming small clouds in the chilly night air. "He never does the dirty work himself," Mendez replied. "But according to my intel, he'll meet them at the handoff point to collect his cut." Dr. Chun adjusted the medical bag slung across her shoulder. "Those crates are too small for the animals inside them. Many will be suffering from dehydration and oxygen deprivation." The cat suddenly tensed, his ears swiveling toward the street. Seconds later, a sleek black sedan pulled up to the dock. The man in the expensive suit stepped out, flanked by a burly guard with a visible shoulder holster. "That's Lawrence Drake," Mendez hissed, his hand instinctively moving to his service weapon. "He coordinates shipments across state lines. He's much higher up the chain than I expected to see tonight." Martha watched as Drake inspected one of the crates, lifting a corner of the cloth covering it. The faint sound of distressed animal cries drifted across the alley. Drake nodded, apparently satisfied, and handed Harmon an envelope. "We need to move now," Dr. Chun whispered urgently. "Those animals won't survive a long transport." Mendez hesitated. "I called for backup, but they're still 20 minutes out. We're outnumbered and they're armed." The smoky cat had apparently tired of waiting. Before any of them could react, he darted from their hiding place and streaked across the alley, slipping between crates and machinery until he reached the van. With graceful precision, he jumped onto the hood and then up to the building's low roof. "What is he doing?" Martha whispered, but her question was answered immediately when the cat began knocking items off the roof. Empty bottles, small pieces of equipment, creating a commotion that drew everyone's attention upward. "Now's our chance," Mendez said, pulling out his badge and gun. "Stay behind me." They emerged from behind the dumpster just as Drake shouted at his guard to check the roof. Mendez identified himself, his voice echoing in the alley. "Police. Everyone. On the ground. Hands where I can see them." What followed was chaos. The guard reached for his weapon, but froze when Mendez trained his gun on him. Harmon attempted to flee but slipped on the wet pavement, crashing into a stack of empty cages. Drake, however, remained eerily calm, his cold eyes assessing the situation. "Detective Mendez," he said with a thin smile. "So the rumors about a mole were true. Pity. It's over, Drake," Mendez replied, keeping his gun steady. "We have everything. The shipment records, the financial transactions, evidence of animal abuse and endangered species trafficking." Drake's smile didn't waver. "Do you? And who exactly will testify? The old librarian? The washed-up vet?" His gaze shifted to Martha, who felt a chill run down her spine. "People like you should mind their own business." "These animals are my business," Dr. Chun said firmly, stepping forward despite Mendez's warning glance. "I've documented every injury, every violation of the Animal Welfare Act and the Endangered Species Act." Drake laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Councilman Reynolds sits on the State Wildlife Commission. His conservation foundation has friends. In Washington, who do you think they'll believe? A sudden commotion from the roof drew everyone's attention. The smoky cat was no longer alone. At least a dozen cats of various sizes and colors had appeared, all wearing the same medallion. They lined the edge of the roof like sentinels, their eyes gleaming in the darkness. Drake's composure finally cracked. What the hell? In that moment of distraction, Martha noticed movement behind the van. A figure slipped out of the shadows, a slender woman with close-cropped hair and intense eyes. She wore dark clothing and moved with silent efficiency as she approached the rear of the van and began expertly picking the lock. The watchers, Dr. Chun breathed, recognition dawning on her face. The woman at the van got the doors open and began quickly photographing the crates inside, using a small device to scan what appeared to be shipping labels and documents. Drake noticed too late. "Stop her," he shouted, but his guard was still frozen under Mendez's aim. The woman finished her documentation and melted back into the shadows, but not before making deliberate eye contact with Martha and giving her a slight nod. Distant sirens pierced the night, growing louder by the second. Drake's face contorted with rage as he realized his position was untenable. "This isn't over," he snarled, backing toward his car. "Reynolds has judges in his pocket. Congressman, you have no idea how deep this goes." "Maybe," Martha said, finding courage she didn't know she had. "But now we have proof. And we're not the only ones watching." As if on cue, the cats on the roof let out a synchronized, haunting yowl that sent shivers down Martha's spine. The backup Mendez had called for finally arrived. 3 police cruisers and an animal control van screeching into the alley, officers pouring out with weapons drawn. Drake was caught halfway to his vehicle, his escape cut off. Within minutes, Drake, Harmon, and the guard were in handcuffs, and animal control officers were carefully removing the crates from the van. Dr. Chun immediately set to work examining the animals and providing emergency care to those in distress. Martha found herself standing apart from the activity, suddenly exhausted as the adrenaline drained from her system. The smoky cat appeared at her feet, rubbing against her ankles before looking up at her with those intelligent, mismatched eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, bending down to stroke his soft fur. "Whatever you are, whoever sent you, thank you." The cat purred in response, but his attention was already elsewhere, focused on a familiar black sedan pulling up at the far end of the street. Even from this distance, Martha could recognize Councilman Reynolds behind the wheel, his face a mask of shock as he took in the scene unfolding at his loading dock. The smoky cat's tail twitched once, and Martha understood. Their night wasn't over yet. Councilman Reynolds' hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His eyes darted between the police cars, the arrested smugglers, and the animal control officers carefully loading rescued creatures into specially equipped vans. When he spotted Martha standing near Detective Mendez, his expression hardened into something dangerous. "He's going to run," Martha said, just as Reynolds threw his car into reverse. Before Mendez could react, a sleek motorcycle roared past them, cutting off Reynolds' escape route. The rider, dressed in black leather, dismounted in one fluid motion and approached the councilman's car. To Martha's surprise, it was the same woman who had documented the evidence at the van, the one Dr. Chun had called a watcher. "Marcus Reynolds," Mendez announced, striding toward the car with handcuffs ready. "You're under arrest for trafficking endangered species, conspiracy, racketeering, and about a dozen other charges we'll sort out downtown." As Mendez led a shell-shocked Reynolds away, the mystery woman approached Martha. Up close, Martha could see the same medallion the cats wore, hanging from a thin chain around her neck. "Thank you, Miss Simons," she said, her voice low and melodic. "Without your courage, we would have lost this entire shipment." "Who are you?" "People," Martha asked. "Dr. Chen mentioned something called the Watchers." The woman smiled. "We're a network of people, and yes, animals, dedicated to protecting endangered species around the world. Sometimes working within the system isn't enough, especially when corruption runs deep." She gestured to the smoky cat, who sat regally nearby, observing the scene with apparent satisfaction. "This is Ash. He's one of our most experienced operatives." "Operatives?" Martha repeated incredulously. "He's a cat. Cats go everywhere, see everything, and no one questions their presence," the woman explained. "They're perfect for surveillance. Those with the right temperament are trained to recognize signs of animal trafficking and to seek out humans who might help." "And the medallion?" "A tracking device, among other things. It helps us monitor their movements and identify each other." She touched her own medallion briefly. "I'm Maya, by the way." Before Martha could respond, Dr. Chen joined them, her medical bag now empty, her face weary but triumphant. "The animals are stabilized. Most will survive with proper care." Maya nodded. "We have sanctuaries ready to receive them. Places Reynolds and his friends don't know about." Across the street, Mendez was coordinating with additional officers who had arrived on scene. Evidence was being cataloged, statements taken. The operation was being dismantled piece by piece. "Will it stick?" Martha asked, suddenly worried. "Drake," said Reynolds, "has connections. It will stick," Maya said confidently. "We've been building this case for years, gathering evidence from multiple shipments across 3 states. With what we collected tonight, plus your USB drive, we have everything we need to bring down not just Reynolds, but his entire network." Dr. Chen looked at Ash with newfound respect. "All these years treating animals, and I never imagined." Ash blinked slowly at her, then stood and stretched before approaching Martha. He rubbed against her legs once more, then looked up at her expectantly. "I think he's saying goodbye," Maya said gently. Martha felt a surprising pang of loss. "He's leaving? His work here is done. He'll be needed elsewhere." Maya hesitated, then added, Unless what? The Watchers are always looking for new allies. People with sharp eyes, quick minds, and compassionate hearts. Particularly those who might go unnoticed." She gave Martha an appraising look. "Retirees make excellent observers, Miss Simons." Martha blinked in surprise. "You want me to join you?" "At my age." "Age is an advantage in our work. No one suspects the elderly librarian of being part of an international network fighting wildlife crime." Maya smiled. "And Ash seems to have chosen you already." As if in confirmation, Ash leapt gracefully into Martha's arms, settling against her chest with a rumbling purr. For a creature that had seemed so aloof and purposeful, this display of affection was startling. Martha looked from the cat to Maya to Dr. Chun, who was watching the exchange with evident amusement. "I'm not exactly field agent material," Martha said, but even as the words left her mouth, she felt a spark of excitement she hadn't experienced in years. "Not all watching happens in the field," Maya replied. "Sometimes it's monitoring shipping manifests, cross-referencing adoption records, or simply keeping your eyes open in your own community." She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small card with nothing but a phone number embossed in silver. "If you're interested, call this number. If not," she shrugged, "Ash will move on to his next assignment." 2 weeks later, Martha sat on her porch, reading the morning newspaper. The headline proclaimed, "Wildlife Trafficking Ring Dismantled, Councilman and Associates Face Federal Charges." Smaller articles detailed how the investigation had expanded to 3 other cities, with more arrests expected. Dr. Chun, now managing The temporary care facility for the rescued animals had become a regular visitor to Martha's small home. They had formed an unlikely friendship, united by their shared experience. Martha sipped her tea and glanced down at Ash, who was sunning himself on the porch railing. The medallion around his neck had been joined by a smaller, silver tag that Martha had received after making a certain phone call. "You knew all along, didn't you?" she murmured to the cat. "That I was lonely, that I needed a purpose." Ash merely blinked those mismatched eyes, somehow managing to look both innocent and smugly satisfied. Martha's phone buzzed with a text message. "Unusual shipment arriving at West Side Docks tomorrow, 9 p.m. Observation. Only. M." Martha smiled, slipping the phone back into the pocket of her cardigan. At 74, she had become something she never expected: a watcher, a guardian, a part of something much larger than herself. "Well, partner," she said to Ash, who was now alert and watching her intently, "it seems we have work to do." From across the street, a tabby cat with a familiar medallion observed them from atop a fence post. Then another appeared on a nearby roof, and a third near a parked car. Martha now noticed what she had missed before. They were everywhere, these silent sentinels with their ancient Egyptian symbol, watching and waiting, protecting those who could not protect themselves. And now, she was one of them.